Governor, good to see you. Happy New Year. I'm excited for what 2025 is going to bring in for us.
Well, me too, Sean. Happy New Year to you. I think all of us are glad to get 2024 behind us. It was a brutal election year. More than that, it was just a brutal year for America because we had a president who didn't know he was there. We had a substitute candidate that really was an unbelievably poor candidate. And yet we ended on a positive note, thank goodness, the reelection of Donald Trump. And I think 2025 is going to be a great year for America.
Yeah, I do too. 18 days until the inauguration. All right, I want to get to a lot of good stuff. But before I do that, are you a resolutions kind of guy?
You know, I used to be, but I finally made a resolution to not do any more resolutions. So that's my resolution. Don't do any.
All right. Well, that makes that question easy. I think my kids are young, and I think we have this fun family tradition where we write them all down. Everybody gets to do some stuff, and then the following year, when we go out to dinner as a family, we kind of go over what we said we do, and we get to grade each other. So it's sort of become a family thing, which is fun because, you either lost 10 pounds or you didn't, and I always didn't. So, it's fun. I will say this though, and this is kind of maybe the perfect day to do this little reflection. I can't help but to really think about the difference between 2016 when Donald Trump won and 2020 when he won, and this period of time in the lead up to the inauguration. And before I share with you my thoughts, I want to give you a chance to share with yours because I have some interesting takes on how I think these times are different and why, but I'd love your take.
Well, of course, you had a front row seat back in 2016, so yours will be pretty accurate in terms of that one. Here's what I think is significantly different. In 2016, Donald Trump was not fully prepared for what he was about to do. I don't mean that as a detrimental remark about him. There's no way that anyone would be prepared. And I think even people around him were somewhat surprised. Hey, he won. He beat Hillary, pulled this thing off. He was surrounded in some ways by people who pushed him to appoint those who were loyal to them more than they were loyal to Trump and the America First agenda. That put him in a very tough spot to start with, though he didn't realize it for a long time. Secondly, we have now 4 years of Joe Biden versus 4 years of Donald Trump. And the people of America were able to clearly see the distinction and realize that, yeah, Donald Trump sometimes will say some things that seem impolite. But the truth is, we love his transparency, his authenticity, and the fact that we do know what he's thinking. We're not being told one thing and delivered something else. And that's refreshing. People are ready for Donald Trump to be president. We saw it on Election Day. But since that time, look at what's happened. Every world leader has come hat in hand and made their pilgrimage to Mar-a-Lago to kiss the ring. You have people from the media who either have made their pilgrimage, like Joe and Mika, who went down to pretend that they're fine now and everything's good. And you had ABC, who had to write a check for $15 million because George Stephanopoulos ended up being the partisan hack that he always has been rather than a true journalist. So everything has changed. You're not seeing the level of, I'm leaving the country, even though a lot of these celebrities say they will. And quite frankly, Sean, I hope some of them do. It would be good for all of us if it happened.
Yeah. I think, though, to your point about corporate America and the media, there was this feeling in 2016 that we weren't legitimate. Russia had tipped the scale. All this hoax that was perpetrated on the American people, these lies. And from day one, I remind people, on Inauguration Day, the media lied, tried to inflame racial tensions by insinuating that Donald Trump had falsely removed the bust of Martin Luther King from, and that was not, a simple, when I tell people this, I go, all the reporter had to do was go like this. For those listening on the audio, I literally just turned around. It was right there. And it was a gotcha moment. And I felt like that typified the entire lead up to it. It was gotcha. You're bad. You're not legitimate. Whereas this time, to your point, these corporate and media leaders, and even Democrats, whether it's the DOGE effort to reduce government waste are coming and saying, "Oh, we want to work with the guy." There's such a difference but I think it's also in Donald Trump, right? And that's kind of interesting to me that 2016 he was fighting back, right? He was fighting the media, fighting the "I don't need you guys, you're a bunch of jerks." This time he's risen above it. And I think it's because they embraced him as the rightful winner of this election. They were wrong on DEI and woke policies. He was right. And so therefore, he's being the bigger man. The tone and tenor are different this time. I think because he reflects their actions towards him. In 2016, it was sort of like this really contentious attempt for them to show that they didn't like Trump. This time, they're like, the American people have spoken.
I think you've really hit it, and especially on the idea that in 2016, they defied and denied that he was the duly elected president. So you had Hillary out there saying that he was illegitimate. You had a number of Democrats saying they should not even certify the election. I don't know why that wasn't an insurrection, but we had that. We're not having it this time. I mean, he won so decisively. The popular vote, the Electoral College in a landslide, all 7 swing states. You look at the map of America, it's a bright red. It's hard, even for his harshest critics, to deny that his win was a true statement of the American people who woke up and said, we're sick of this nonsense you guys have shoved down our throats, telling us the economy's great when we know it isn't, or telling us that, COVID, we saved you from that, and we know you didn't. The nonsense about gender fluidity and the insanity that's come with that. Overall, Democrats overplayed their hand. Donald Trump had a masterful campaign. It was brilliant. And I think people, frankly, even his critics are optimistic that our economy is going to get better. The world is going to get more peaceful. People recognize that, like him or not, Donald Trump is a leader and he gets things done. I said on a television show last week, I said, that typically a person in politics has strong ideological leanings. And I said, he has ideology, but he's not an ideologue. He's not even that ideological. He's a pragmatist. The two
Yes.
questions Donald Trump approaches every issue with is not, is this right or left? Is this Democrat or Republican? He simply wants to know 2 things. One, will it work? And number 2, will it make life better for the people that it's intended to help? And if those 2 questions are answered, whether it's considered a liberal or a conservative policy is irrelevant to him because he's not ideological. He is pragmatic.
Yeah, I've noticed, and people who I associate with who might not be the biggest Trump supporters have said to me, Sean, the tone and tenor of this Donald Trump is different than the one that we're used to. He's more measured. He's more pragmatic. He's less pugnacious, maybe is the word. Where and so the question I have is, and again, I always think it's a reflection of how he's being treated. You treat him with respect, he treats you with respect. You come at him like a spider monkey, he'll come back at you. And
Wow.
and I feel like I actually think it's deeper than that. I believe you get 2 assassination attempts and threats on your life. You think deeper about your relationship with God. You think about how valuable life is and your legacy and what you want to do with the time that you have on this earth. Am I off base here, or do you think that maybe this is just Trump and then we'll have a new one on Inauguration Day?
No, I think you've exactly nailed it, especially on the 2 assassination attempts. That's sobering for any human being. I don't care who you are. And I think it was a defining moment in Butler, Pennsylvania, when after being shot in the ear and almost within a couple of millimeters being murdered on national television, who stood up with blood coming down his face and said, fight, fight, fight. And he defied every kind of instinct most people would have, would be to stay down, stay covered up. He stands up, faces the world, and potentially facing his attacker and basically saying, you miss me. I mean, it was just, it was a moment in history that we'll never be able, I think, to see again. And it was not scripted. This was Donald Trump in his genuine, authentic fight mode. And I think a lot of Americans looked at him and said, you know, if this guy can stand up from a bullet and say, let's fight back, let's save this country, that's the kind of guy I want leading this country. It was I believe, a turning point, not only for him personally, but for the country.
I do too. I mean, I had lunch in December. I was at a lunch, let's just be clear, with, I think it was 6 Medal of Honor recipients.
Mm.
And we were talking about their sacrifice. And as I was listening to their acts of heroism and bravery, I kept thinking to myself, let's be honest. I don't know that I would even, I could do, like, in that moment, would I do what they did?
Mm.
And there is an extraordinary human being that can do these kind of things. And if we're honest with ourselves, we can, you know, there's a continuum, which we say we hide under the bed. Maybe we rush. I don't know. Sometimes, hopefully, with God's grace, I won't be tested. But to your point about him getting shot, I thought about it, and I'm like, you know, he gets up and goes, fight, fight, fight. He has no idea how hit he really is. Yeah. Right? I mean, he knows there's blood. He knows there's agents. There's chaos ensuing. And I kept thinking to myself, what would I have done in that moment? I don't know that I can honestly answer it, but I certainly wouldn't have raised my hand and said, fight, fight, fight. I know that, if I'm going to be honest. And I really agree with your sentiment, because I think people looked at that and said, if your gut feeling is to get up and to say fight, when you don't even know how you're doing, that says a lot about what's in your core.
Yeah. He rose to the occasion in a way that you see among a Medal of Honor recipient, because that's an unscripted moment. It's not something, say, okay, now today we're going out and here's what's going to happen. You're going to get shot and you're going to have a couple of moments to think about it. I mean, typically a person who now has just been within millimeters of being murdered is going to be in a, I got to be protected, get me out of here mode. He took charge. The agents weren't in charge of that moment. He was.
Right,
he told me, get me my shoes. I want to stand up. You're not going to pull me away from this stage. I'm going to stand up and face the world and tell them to fight. I mean, it was, again, that was his natural reaction. And that's the point of all of this. It was who he is, because when you're squeezed, people say, you know, what do you get when you squeeze a lemon? And the answer is, well, lemon juice. No, the answer is whatever's in the lemon. And so when a human being is squeezed, what comes out of them is what's really inside of them. So what we saw come out of Donald Trump that day was what was inside of him. And it was courage, it was leadership, and it was take charge. What do we want in the president? We want courage, we want leadership, and we want someone who can take charge.
Yeah, that's you're right, because the moments that a presidency is defined are those moments of crisis. And we want someone who's going to be willing to stand up, to fight, to do the right thing. And as you said, rightly so, that this is what a president's all about. Here's my question for you. As a guy who's like run for president before, who interviews a lot of these folks, do you think that what happens when Donald Trump exits the stage of elected office, right? He'll obviously, I think till he takes his last breath, Donald Trump will be a factor. But I wonder, meaning, do you think that there's somebody, an heir to him, that could take his place?
There's not going to be another Donald Trump, because he comes from a very different place than anyone ever has in politics. He never even ran for sheriff. I mean, this guy comes down the escalator from the Trump Tower, where he's run multi-billion-dollar businesses, and says, I'm going to be president. And people are saying, you usually don't start there. You got to go through maybe being governor, senator, or something. And yet he defied all political gravity to be Donald Trump. But he also had a command of knowing how to communicate to the average person, particularly the working class people, in a way that no one has ever been able to do before. He knows how to brand. He brands his opponents. He brands the people he likes. And those brands tend to stick. And there are just so many things about Donald Trump that I don't see as characteristic in anyone else on the playing field. Will there be other leaders? Of course. Strong leaders? Absolutely. Articulate? Maybe even more so. But nobody is going to come in and replicate the extraordinary path that Donald Trump has had.
You know, you are a leader in the evangelical movement. You're a pastor yourself. Why has he been able to do or been so successful within the evangelical and Christian communities in a way that people like George W. Bush, an actual evangelical, weren't?
Authenticity. I think some people believe that the evangelical community are looking for someone who is like them. Well, they're not. They would love to have someone who shares all their beliefs and values, but what they want is somebody who will lead the country in a uplifting way, but more importantly, who is authentic to oneself. And a lot of people have questioned me and said, why did evangelicals support Trump? He's not one of us. And I said, no, he isn't. In fact, I introduced him in the summer of 2016 at a big event at the Marriott Marquis in New York. Ben Carson and I hosted it. We were trying to really raise support for Donald Trump. And he was sitting 4 feet away from me on the stage. And I said to this crowd of 1,200 religious leaders from all over America, I said, guys, Donald Trump is not one of us. Let's not pretend that he is. I said, quite frankly, you're not going to find him sitting on the front pew of your church Sunday. I'm not sure the man could find John 3:16 in a marked New Testament. But I said, we're not voting for him to be our pastor, but we're voting on him to be our president and someone who would take this country and lead it in the right way. And as far as we're concerned, leave us alone and let us practice the First Amendment. Don't try to tell us what to believe, what to say, or how to worship.
Wow, that's funny. It's just hysterical. Sometimes people on the left will ask, how can people that are very religious support the guy? And I've actually never articulated as well as you did, but I've just talked about the fact that sometimes God has very interesting tools and vehicles to carry his will out. And it's not always the purest. The Bible's very clear about this, that it's not always the purest among us that God has chosen to enact his will.
I had a pastor when I was a teenager who used to say, God can hit a straight lick with a crooked stick. And I'm not saying that about Donald Trump. I'm just saying that, we tend to want to package maybe a personality and think that that's what the Lord has to use. Well, he doesn't. And what I feel like that Donald Trump has done, he has shown us what courageous leadership looks like. He did it in his first term. I cannot imagine that he was able to get out of bed every day knowing that he was going to be faced with 100 phony stories about him, an unbelievable level of everything from criminal charges to impeachments by people who hated his very existence. And yet he got up every day. He continued to do the job throughout this campaign with all of the criminal indictments and stuff that was so nonsensical. I think Americans looked at him and said, if he can keep going, faced with all that he's having to face, then there's somebody who can lead this country. No matter what this world throws at him, he's able to stand up to it. And that's one of the reasons I think you saw record numbers of Black voters, Hispanic voters, younger people voting for a Republican when they typically would not.
Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.